I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, Paul, you're wearing a dressing gown. If it was good enough for Arthur Dent, it's good enough for a man who's going to review the last ever episode of Stranger Things. Right, just in case this is the first of my reviews you've seen, you might want to check out the rest of this playlist where I cover the 5th series of Stranger Things. That said, my name is Paul. I'm also called Knick-Knack. I do the daily teaser quiz and quite a lot of them. I review movies occasionally and I review TV shows. This is the most recent entry on my reviews of the 5th and last season of Stranger Things. And I thought you'd be interested in what I had to say about the right side up. This is what I saw and what I thought. Chapter 8, The Right Side Up, fades open from darkness and shows the gate from Hawkins to the Upside Down and showing his troops coming through it. The camera pans round to show us Dr. K, Linda Hamilton, at the observation point that was supposed to be watching the gate, and shows us K noticing unconscious soldiers and stores that have been rifled through and pilfered. On the other side of the gate, we see the delivery lorry driven by Murray, Brett Gelman, heading deeper into the Upside Down, so that Murray and some of the passengers he's carrying, 11, Hop and Carly, Millie Bobby Brown, David Harbour and Linnea Bertelstein, can get off and head for the Upside Down version of the Hawkins lab. Little do the Corsair realise that they're being watched and hunted. The scene shifts again to the mental construct that is Vecna's version of the Creel family home, where in the dining room, the children Vecna has kidnapped are performing the ritual that will fuse our world and the abyss. Little knowing that the illusion masks exactly where they are, connected to the beating heart of the Mind Flayer itself. Post-credits, we see Erica and Mr. Clark, Priya Ferguson, Randy Havens, are at the bell tower of Hawkins Presbyterian Church, keeping watch so that they can warn the team in the Upside Down about oncoming soldiers. Soldiers who soon turn up in force, park at the church's entrance, and capture the isolated pair. Meanwhile, Vicky and Max, Amy Beth McNulty and Sadie Sink, are at the offices of Squawk of Hawkins Radio, desperately trying to keep in touch with a group led by Nancy Reeler, Natalia Dyer, and whose sole walkie-talkie is being operated by Vicky's lover, Robin. The group, Nancy, Robin, Lucas, Dustin, Steve, Mike, Will, and Jonathan, Caleb McLaughlin, Gaten Matarazzo, Joe Keery, Finn Wolfhard, Noah Schnapp, and Charlie Heaton, are on their way to the antenna that broadcasts the signal from the Squawk. The antenna is the key to the teams stopping the two worlds joining, and we'll need some of them to climb all the 500 rusty feet of vine-covered metal. Stopping Vecna's plan, to paraphrase Jonathan, it's going to take some time. So what did I make of Right Side Up, of this final episode of Stranger Things, of the 5th series and Stranger Things itself? Let's start with that first question, shall we? What did I make of the Right Side Up? I have to admit, I went into it, or into this viewing, with a certain amount of trepidation. I've been provisionally diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity, ADHD, a while back, and I'm still waiting for the first set of formal tests, which should hopefully be happening in November. So the fact the Right Side Up was some 2 hours long was a worry. If a show or a film isn't holding my attention, it's very easy for me to get bored, hit the pause button, grab a cuppa, go to the loo, and play a game or two for 5 minutes, or possibly more than two. At any rate, The Right Side Up wasn't as long as The Piggyback, the season 4 finale, which was some 2 hours and 20 minutes. But both were very long, worryingly, but both were also very well paced episodes that held my attention for the most part. The Right Side Up more so than The Piggyback. The provisional ADHD diagnosis and the 20-minute time difference could have had something to do with that, as could the structure of The Right Side Up. After all, the overarching story, the fight between the good people of Hawkins and the monster that was Vecna and the military, was brought to a very satisfying end after about an hour or so by the swing of an axe carried by Joyce Byers, Winona Ryder, and carried by Joyce since the start of the episodes. Remind me to tell you about Chekhov's gun at some point. There are other threads I can mention, as Vecna's ultimate death is not the end of the story, or at least not the end of the first hour's worth of the story. The abyss has been dealt with, but the upside down still has to be dealt with. That's done with a pile of C4 plastic explosive rigged up to a primitive timer made from a couple of contacts linked to a record player, rigged up by Hop and Murray, David Harbour and Brett Gelman, and one that will detonate when two wires touch together, and it means that no one in our world would be able to access the upside down. The explosion takes Eleven with it, so she can avoid being captured by Dr. K. Eleven sacrifices herself, in other words, after leaving Mike a telepathic message. It is one hell of an ending. There is possibly a lot I could say about the ending of The Right Side Up, as the episode has effectively got two endings. The first is where we see Vecna's death, the destruction of the Upside Down, and the potential death of Eleven. All of that is roughly done halfway through the episode. The remaining hour, some 18 months after the closing of the Upside Down, marks the end both of this fifth series and of Stranger Things itself. It's at this point you're going to ask me a question, aren't you? You're going to say, Paul, has Stranger Things really had a happy ending? Yes, it has. We see many things happening to give this episode and the series a happy ending. We see Nancy, Steve, Jonathan, and Robin on the roof of Hawkins Radio planning their future in a world that finally is peaceful. Hop and Joyce, we see them on a date at the reopened Enzo's restaurant, a date that sees Joyce gleefully accepting Hop's proposal of marriage. We see Hawkins High, where Dustin makes the valedictorian graduation speech, one really only Dustin can do, involving a t-shirt. And we see a graduation that Mike is finally persuaded to attend, while still grieving Eleven's death. And it's later that night, after a cheerful graduation, that we see Mike refereeing one last session of Dungeons and Dragons for his friends, for Lucas, Max, Will, and Dustin. And as part of the game, telling his friends a final story of one character, of how he takes hope in his belief that Eleven fakes her death and is quietly living somewhere in a beautiful land somewhere far away. Happy ending? For a child growing up in an environment where she was physically and emotionally abused by monsters, human and magical, growing up in an environment with little in the way of love or affection? I should say so. It's not just Eleven that gets the happy ending, it's her friends and adopted family, and her boyfriend Mike, played by Finn Wolfhard. Practically the last scene of the episode of this series and of the whole show is Mike's Dungeons and Dragons group putting their character folders away one final time and heading upstairs from the basement for dinner, with Mike being the last to do so. As he leaves, Holly, Nell Fisher, and her friends come downside and start setting up their own game, showing us the children who'd been kidnapped by Vecna are now safe and at peace and capable of being kids again, of playing. The ensemble cast of Stranger Things is and has been bloody fantastic, but I had to give Finn Wolfhard a round of applause for this episode and for this last scene. The look, the slight smile on Mike's grieving face, seeing Eleven sacrifice, and his efforts have kept Holly and her friends safe, and being able to be children is truly this. The only happy ending Stranger Things ever needed. So what did I think of the episode and the series as a whole? Let's still deal with the episode. There is more to say, I think. The Right Side Up is bloody superb. This series, over the years, has shown itself to be a well-made show with well-made individual episodes, and The Right Side Up is a very good example of a well-made episode. The cast are incredible, no less amongst them than Finn Wolfhard and Millie Bobby Brown as Mike Wheeler and Eleven. I've highlighted how Brown as Eleven seemed not to have much to do in this fifth series, or at least I mentioned it in earlier reviews. But that seems to have been remedied in this episode, as her presence is the emotional key to the story, or at least to the story's climax. Her presence, her ambiguous possible sacrifice, marks a turning point and reminded me of something. Throughout this fifth series, Eleven hasn't had much to say, in part because she's grown up effectively in a Hawkins lab, in effectively an abusive home. She's had little in the way from affection from Dr. Brenner, Matthew Modine, and grown up stunted as a result, even though she's incredibly powerful. Eleven has had little to say because she finds it hard to talk, something I should maybe have kept in mind writing these reviews. It's something that's not solved in this episode, but it's certainly addressed, as Eleven saves her words for Mike, for the one person she's come to honestly love. The Right Side Up is all the better for saving Eleven's big speech for the last. That speech, dialogue as a whole, the cast in this episode are a handful of good factors, but there are plenty more. I've said it before in this review, this episode is a happy ending for the whole series, and a well-made one at that. And it's an improvement on things like The Iron Throne or Fire from the Gods, the climactic episodes of Game of Thrones and The Man in the High Castle. Fire from the Gods, in particular, I felt was a cop-out ending, especially as the first two series of The Man in the High Castle had been threatening the atomic bombing of San Francisco. The Right Side Up is one hell of an improvement. It's an utterly perfect ending that entirely fits and caps the series and reminds us of something J.R.R. Tolkien wrote very many years ago. It reminds us that once the happy ending's done, the road goes ever on. There are other things we can talk about. The big question, how was this series, Stranger Things, as a series? This will possibly sound repetitive, but Stranger Things as a whole has been a fantastic thing to watch. I grant you, I have not liked the length of the final episodes of seasons 4 or 5, even though those episodes are well paced and very watchable. Equally, the fact that seasons 4 and 5 came in 2 parts was another thing that didn't make me too happy. Call me old-fashioned, but I've grown up watching TV shows that aired once a week, so I prefer to watch them once a week. That's how I prefer to watch them. That's why my reviews, you'll see them going past once a week. In other words, I prefer to watch them with never more than a week between episodes. Something else that sort of annoyed me was the gaps between the series. I am very aware that the gap between season 3 and season 4, between 2019 and 2022, was caused by the various COVID lockdowns. It was irritating, but it was nothing the show's producers could do anything about. But waiting with 3 years between the end of season 4 and the start of season 5 seemed unreasonable to me, even though I know many of the cast were busy with other projects. All that said, Stranger Things as a whole did not suffer from the various gaps. Each series has been well made, well acted, well told, has been done in such a way that the gaps are accounted for and can be ignored. And it's an utter pleasure to watch the whole series. I have to admit, I felt this episode and the show it's part of were pretty damn good, it's got to be said. But even so, I still have questions as a result of the quality of this show. One, should there be spin-offs? I don't know, although I'm very aware of the planned Stranger Things Tales from 85 animated series, in which it's set in one of the missing years between 3 and 4. Another question, should there be a prequel? Again, I don't know. This series 5, has shown us the events that see Henry becoming Vecna, show him beating a man to death in a cave, opening the man's suitcase and picking out the fragment of my Mind Flayer, a fragment that immediately sinks into Henry's hand and does something. It strikes me that this story of how the man got the fragment, where he got it from, how he ended up on his own being beaten to death in a cave, could be a story worth telling. Again, I don't know for sure, but I have to wait and see. A third, should there be a direct sequel to Stranger Things? Should there? No. The Stranger Things story, as told, is done. It's complete in and of itself and utterly, utterly perfect. The characters' story arcs, with the very possible exception of 11, have been done. Changing that by trying to extend those arcs would ruin what's got on screen. Other stories in the same universe with different characters set years after or before the original, no problem. But a direct sequel? No. These five series, much like the original 3 series of Star Trek from the 1960s, are fine as they are. That does not mean there shouldn't be a spin-off, a Stranger Things The Next Generation, with new characters in a much later time period. But a direct sequel, as far as I'm concerned, no. So, finally, what did I make of the Right Side Up and the series it's part of? The episode is a blinder. It shows us the ending of the villain that's been plaguing Hawkins, but also shows us the traditional and very well done happy ending that the heroes get. It's as perfect a final episode of a TV series that I have seen in a long time. The series it's a happy ending to is likewise one of the most watchable things I think I've seen in many years. Stranger Things is by turns fearsome, funny, touching, and it has a setting both real and otherwise with characters both menacing and absolutely sympathetic. If you've not fallen utterly in love with all of them by the end of this series, you've got something wrong with you. The story also tells us this. It's like any good story and any good fairy tale and any good game of Dungeons and Dragons. It tells us that there are monsters, but the monsters can be beaten. Getting that out of 5 episodes, 5 series of a TV show tells you how fantastic it is. Right, folks, that is where, for now, I'm going to be leaving things, but I will thank you for either reading the original post this video is based on, or for just watching to the end of the video in the first place. Thank you very much. Please feel free to subscribe and like this video. Please feel free to tip if you're feeling generous. The link will be in the corner there or in the comment section under this video. And feel free to have a look at the rest of my content as well. On my YouTube channel, I'm Mr. Cuddy2977, and my blog, Knickknacks Old Peculiar. I am also planning to review the next series of For All Mankind as and when I get a chance to breathe, and maybe watch a movie or two and let you know what I thought. Please feel free to subscribe and hit the notification. That'll tell you when there's a quiz and when there's a review. I will see you next time, and until then, be seeing you.